Mr. Dreesen, are you there?
Yeah.
There you are. As I mentioned when we were preparing for this, I saw you open for Frank Sinatra in 1987, and to prove it, I pulled out the old ticket stub. October
Wow.
17th, 1987. I was 17 years old, and I was a diehard Sinatra junkie, and seeing you
Was
guys
that
together was a treat.
in Worcester, Massachusetts?
Worcester, Massachusetts, at the Centrum.
At
Yeah,
the Centrum, yeah.
yeah.
I got a great story about that. Working because something really profound happened that night. Uh, After the show, I went across the street with the guys in the band. We are gonna have something to eat, and while we're eating, the guitar player, Frank Sinatra's guitar player, a guy named Ron Anthony, said, "See those two young girls over there? There's two young girls sitting at a table." I said, "Yeah." He said, "They during Frank's show, they laid flowers at his feet, and they wept during the show." And I thought, wow, yeah, they were very young. Anyhow, as we were leaving, the two girls came up to where the coat check was, and they said, "Oh, we saw the show. We thought you were funny, blah, blah, blah." And I said, "Thank you very much." I said, "Can I ask you a question? How old are you?" And she said, "I'm 20. I said, "How old is your girlfriend?" She said, "That's my sister. She's 18. I said, "Oh." I said, "The reason I asked that, you seem awful young to be Sinatra fans. And Ron Anthony here told me you laid flowers at Frank's feet and you wept during the show." And she said, "Yes, my mom and dad were huge Sinatra fans, so we grew up listening to his music all the time." She said they actually even had a picture in the living room blown up from one of his albums over the mantle. You know, they were huge Sinatra fans. And my mom and dad died last year, 4 months apart. And my dad died first. She said, and my mom, one night, my mom was in bed and talking to my sister and I about her and dad's love affair, and that she was telling us they used to make love to Frank Sinatra's music, that we were actually conceived to Frank Sinatra's music.
I think a lot of people were, right?
Yeah. She said, so tonight, while we were listening to his songs, we were reflecting on our mom and dad, and that's why we wept. I said, "Oh, that's a very touching story." Now, 2 weeks go by, and I'm at Frank's house, the compound down in Rancho Mirage. We're having dinner, and he was saying to Barbara, "You know, a lot of young people are coming to the concerts lately. Have you noticed that, Tom?" And I told him that story. And my biggest regret was I should have realized what he said. He said, "Did you get their names?" And I didn't, because he was going to send them something, you know. And I was just so taken by their lovely story, you know, that I didn't take their names. I regret that to this day, because I know he would have sent them something to thank them for being fans, you know.
Yeah, you always heard stories of him being very generous that way, and very thoughtful that way.
Beyond your wildest imagination.
Well, us being a roast podcast, there's a lot of places I could start. You've lived 1,000 comedy lives in your career. You've had so many different things we could talk about, but us being a roast podcast, it makes most sense to start with the Dean Martin roasts. And I know you made your Tonight Show debut with Johnny Carson in late '74, and you were one of those people where that kind of launched you into a new stratosphere. And one of those opportunities that grew out of that was probably the Dean Martin roasts, I would imagine.
Yeah, and it wasn't long after that I met Dean. There was a little restaurant across the street from Cedar Sinai Hospital called Dominic's, and it was the most interesting place because you couldn't walk in, you couldn't call for a reservation, and you couldn't walk in off the street. That they had to know who you were, and you couldn't pay by credit card. You either paid by cash or you got a bill once a month. And they only had four. They didn't even have a menu. They had 4 dishes. It was like pork chops, pasta, steak, and I can't remember what else, something else, but chicken of some kind. So, but in that Dominic's restaurant would be Burt Lancaster and Kirk Douglas and Gregory Peck and Frank Sinatra, and the who's who of show business would go in there. And Doc Severinsen took me in there after I did a couple of Tonight shows and introduced me to the place, you know. So then I ended up getting a charge account there. But one night I go in there and I had some friends with me. We seated, and I went to the bar to get some drinks. While I was at the bar, and this is a true story, over in the dark section of the bar, there was a guy in the darkness over there, and I ordered drinks, and he said, "You're a pretty funny little dago." And I went, "Who the heck is calling me a dago?" You know, I looked over, and it was Dean Martin.
Oh, wow.
I said, "Well, you're a pretty funny little dago yourself," you know. And I went up and I shook hands with him, and we talked and everything, and blah, blah, blah. And while we were talking, his manager came in, Mort Viner, and he introduced me to Mort, you know. And what I didn't realize is that Dean stayed home a lot in the afternoons. He'd play golf and but in the afternoons he would watch television, and I was always on, in those days, Dinah Shore and Merv Griffin and stuff like
Right.
that, and he watched the Tonight Show too as well. So within a couple of weeks, I get a call to do the Dean Martin show, and so and I did a couple of the Dean Martin roasts.
That's amazing. So it just came out of popping into that restaurant and meeting Dean Martin. It was that simple.
That's it. Yeah,
Wow.
and we later, Dean and I actually did some shows together, I really enjoyed him. And I played golf with him.
And what's that like? You're a blue collar kid from Harvey, Illinois, on the outskirts of Chicago, and then suddenly you're being flown to the MGM Grand Hotel to sit on this dais, and you look down the dais at a Dean Martin roast, and there's Orson Welles and Gene Kelly and Ronald Reagan and George Burns and Milton Berle. I mean, what's that like for a kid who's a self-made guy? It's a real scrappy striver kind of guy that, got there on his own.
It was always surreal. All this was surreal. Shining. When I was a kid, I had 8 brothers and sisters. We lived in a shack. We had, if a window broke, you stuck a rag in it. If you had holes in your shoes, you put cardboard in it. I shined shoes in taverns. I set pins in bowling alleys. I caddied in the summertime. I sold newspapers on the corner, all to help feed my brothers and sisters. And none of this do I regret at all, by the way. But while I'm shining shoes in these bars, Frank Sinatra's on the jukebox, Dean Martin's
Yeah.
on the jukebox and stuff like that. And, going to the movie theater in Harvey, Illinois, as you said, it's a suburb on the south side of Chicago. It was a real blue collar town, steel mills and factories and everything. And we had 3 theaters in Harvey, Illinois. And you'd go to the movies and see Milton Berle, and you'd see, Orson Welles, and you'd see, Ronald Reagan, and you'd see all these people that were on the dais. And meanwhile, the real exciting thing was being in the green room before the show,
Right.
and watching how they all interacted with one another. I just stand off to the side and watch these legends,
Yeah.
and they treated me real good. I was a new kid on the block at that time, and they treated me real good. It was really, really, really something. And Dean, of course, was in a world of his own. He was totally different from any star you'd ever meet in your life. Very unassuming and casual. And funny. Dean Martin, Rowan Martin, Dick Martin once told me he thought Dean Martin was one of the most underrated comedians in America, because we never think of Dean as a comedian, always as a singer.
Yeah.
But he was a very, very funny guy. And Frank would fall on the floor laughing at Dean.
Right.
Dean wouldn't say anything all day long, and then he'd say one line. It would be the line of the day. It would be,
And it came so natural to him. This might be a controversial statement, but even when he was with Jerry Lewis, it was always Dean Martin that made me kind of laugh more. I don't know. There was just something about his natural, effortless style of comedy
yeah.
that I loved.
I was with a comedy team for 6 years. It's an art form. It's really an unusual art form, because your timing, as a stand-up now, I am in charge of that,
Right.
But when you're a comedy team, you've got to be very careful not to step on your partner's laugh lines. You got to know when, boom, to move on the next line. Dean was a master quarterback of that Martin and Lewis comedy team. He knew when to bring Jerry back in. He would let Jerry go all over the place, but he knew when to bring him back and put the comedy back on track again.
Yeah,
he was brilliant. Yeah.
And those Dean Martin roasts, you did 2 of them. You did Dan Haggerty and you did George Burns. Was it a party-like atmosphere behind the scenes? Because I would imagine you were all flown to Vegas and stayed in the hotel, and you'd get on the elevator and there would be Orson Welles riding down the elevator. I would imagine it was the celebrities all kind of gathered there at the same time, and it became a little bit of a party atmosphere.
Well, somewhat, yeah. But then it would also become about who's got the floor. And, you got Don Rickles and Milton Berle in a room back there. They both wanted the floor. They wanted the attention. And then they would get mad at one another and start, singing one another. It would be hysterical to watch those guys. I'll tell you, one time it was really funny. We were coming back on Republic Airlines back to Burbank Airport. There were 4 of us on the roast, and I think at that time, I think on the plane was Foster Brooks, myself, and I think it was Frank Welker and maybe Ruth Bussey, but they kept us in the first class lounge till it was time to board. And then when we boarded, there was only like 4 seats in this little Republic Airlines plane. And then there was a curtain that led into coach, but they had the curtain shut. So we got on the plane, and the pilot, of course, was fans of the Dean Martin roast, and they were, hey, how'd it go, and blah blah blah. And Foster, played the drunk all the
He
time.
did that amazing drunk routine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Foster said, could I use the microphone to talk to the people and the coach? And the pilot said, in those days you could get away with a lot of things, And the pilot said, yeah, sure. And he gets on, he starts talking to people. Coach, he said, ladies and gentlemen, it's your captain speaking. I'm gonna try to get this big thing off the ground. Now, people in coach were gasping and wanting to head for the exit, and then finally Foster opened up the curtain and waved at him, and then they applauded and cheered. But there was a little panic there for a while.
Yeah, I don't think his drunk routine was masterful. I don't think anybody's done it better before or since. He was incredible.
I'll tell you something interesting about that Dan Haggerty roast.
Yes.
I did that roast, and I did a joke it was a throwaway joke that I had from my nightclub act about people in my neighborhood had a word they used that no one else used, amo, AHMO, amo, kick your butt, amo. And I did it on Dan Haggerty that, he thinks he's a tough guy. He's from the country, in the city, we had tough guys. We had a word they use in amo, AHMO, amo, kick your butt. And Dean laughed, and Abe Vigoda, they all laughed at the thing. Now, I don't know this. 38 years go by, and a woman from Texas contacts me, from Wiley, Texas. She said, she gets a hold of me through Facebook. She said, you don't know me, but I graduated from your high school back in Harvey, Illinois, Thornton High School, and years after me. Right. She said, and I moved to Texas, and I'm a teacher in a high school, Wiley, Texas. And we brought back our coach. We won the state championship. Wiley, Texas, Wiley High School won the championship 38 years ago. The state, and it's real big in Texas, high school football, real big. They won the state championship. She said, our coach came back, and we interviewed him and said, you had a battle cry, AMO, AHMO. Where did you get that at? That you taught your football players? He said, I was watching the Dean Martin roast. This comedian, Tom Dreesen, had said, AMO. Now, he said it was a Sunday night, and they were going to practice Monday and playing for the state championship the following weekend. He said, and we were playing a team called Breckenridge, and we couldn't beat them. They were running everybody out by like 20 points all season long, undefeated. And I watched this, and I went in on Monday. I told them, that's our battle cry, AMO. We break huddle, AMO. AMO breaking.
That's incredible.
With 6 seconds to go, they scored a touchdown, and they won the state championship. All the students went back, the cheerleaders went back, and they painted AMO all over the town, of Wiley. From that word, after that, they had T-shirts. Their football players have AMO on their shirt. They have the crowd chants AMO, 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 whether they're winning or whether they're losing. They sold bracelets, sweaters, hats, cowbells, gloves, AMO. When she's telling me this story, I said, that's impossible. That I never heard about that in 38 years. Anyhow, they flew me down to Texas. I went to their homecoming game. The crowd's chanting AMO. Like, they're introducing me like I'm Shakespeare. I wrote, that's the dumbest joke that I ever wrote in my life. It was a setup joke. But I'm telling you, people, when I was down there, a guy came up to me when he got married. He was a colonel in the Air Force. He showed me his wedding picture, him and the bride center, with on the floor was a sign said AMO. The marching band marches to AHMO, all from the Dean Martin roast.
Wow.
All from that one silly, stupid joke.
Roasting Grizzly Adams, you inspired football players for decades.
Yeah. I give credit to the coach. His name was Schaefer.
I remember with the George Burns roast, you got a big laugh with a story about your grandmother, which was probably a bit from your maybe it was a bit from your act that you adapted, but it was about your grandmother having glaucoma, but being a big fan of George Burns. Do you remember that joke at all?
Yeah, I think it was something about smoking marijuana, but something she said to watch. She was a big fan of George's. I said something about, she said to watch every move you make. I've been watching you all night long, and you haven't moved at all, or something. Yeah. I can't remember. Yeah, I went to see him one time. One of the stories I love to tell. I went to see him. I was working at Harrah's on Lake Tahoe, and George Burns was at Caesars. And it was just right after the roast. So after my show, I ran over to catch his show. He was 95 years old. He didn't run out to the microphone, but when he got there, he did a good hour and 10 minutes.
Incredible.
And I went backstage in the wings. I went back to the stage to say hello to him. And when I went backstage, he had some 3x5 cards that he was looking at. And I walked in this dressing room and he looked up. He said, "Oh, hi, Tom." I said, "Hi, George." He said, "I was working on some new material tonight." He was looking at the 3x5 cards. I said, "That's what I want to be. I want to be 95 years old working on new material."
That's incredible. I've heard you tell a funny story about him at Hillcrest when he was 95, and they asked him to go over and say hello to a guy who had just turned 100 who was celebrating his birthday. Do you remember that story?
Oh, I remember the story, but can we tell it here?
Yeah, sure. You can tell it here.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Well, the story was that Hillcrest Country Club, he would go there every day and go in the gin room and have a cigar and a martini. Now, at one time, there was no smoking inside anymore, but they didn't want to lose George as a customer because he was a member there all those years. So they put a big sign up in the gin room: no smoking in here unless you're 95 years old or older. So he was the only one qualified. So in the banquet room there, the dining room, this woman saw George in there, and she went in there and said, "I know I'm not allowed to be in here." It was a men's grill or something. She said, "I know I'm not allowed to be here, but our grandfather it's his 100th birthday." And I'm shocked I'm telling this story, but he said, "It's 100th birthday. Would you come out and say hello to him? It would mean the world to our family." And George said, "When I finish my drink, I'll be out there." And time went by, and George got up, and his buddies followed him out into the banquet room. And there is a long table with a whole family. And at the end of the table is an old guy with a suit on and a red bow tie. So George just walked all the way up to the end of the table, and he said to the old guy, "How old are you?" And the guy looked up and he said, I'm 100 years old." George said, "You want to fuck my sister?" Now, the table just roared and cracked up because when you're 95 years old, you can say whatever you want to say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I want to go back. Before you did the Dean Martin roasts, you did 2 episodes of a variety show called Sammy and Company, hosted by Sammy Davis Jr., and that led to you being his opening act. So you kind of worked your way through the Rat Pack. You had Sammy, Dean, and then that culminated with the big guy, Frank, the chairman, right?
Yeah, it was. I saw Sammy when I was with the comedy team. Tim Reed and I were America's first black and white comedy team. History shows were the last.
Right.
We did it for 6 years, from 1969 to 1974, early 75. So almost 6 years. And at that time, in those days, there were no comedy clubs. So we worked what they affectionately call the Chitlin Circuit, black-owned, black-operated nightclubs all around the world, United States, I mean, and in the North and in the South. But one time we were doing a show in Chicago called the Black Expo. It was 1 week at the Black Exposition, 1 week of African-American art and culture and business meetings and interchanging cards and, cultivating businesses among Black businesses. But it culminated with a show. It was like 10,000 people in this huge arena, and it was an all-day show. It would be the OJs, the Temptations, Smokey Robinson and the Miracles, the Dells. It would be, comics and, all these Black singers and artists. And whenever they had a singer on, when the singer left the stage and had to strike the stage to get the next act on, they'd send a comedian out, go out and do 5 minutes, do 10 minutes, So we waited about 6 hours, which I didn't mind because we were watching, these wonderful artists perform.
Acts, yeah.
And all of a sudden, Sammy Davis Jr. came in. And the whole crowd backstage, Sammy. Sammy had flown 3,500 miles to be there for the Black Expo. But 4 months prior to that, Sammy had gone to the White House and received an award, and he hugged President Nixon. Well, Sammy hugged stop signs. He hugged everybody. But when the president gave him the award, he hugged him. Well, they took a picture. That picture went on the cover of Jet and the cover of Ebony, and Sammy became persona non grata in the Black community because they were very anti-Nixon. But this is the first time he was appearing in front of a Black audience after that photograph had been out. Now, when backstage, everybody, "Oh man, Sammy Davis Jr." The MC went out and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, these thousands of people, blah, 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 welcome, please, Sammy Davis Jr." And 10,000 people began to boo and jeer and scream, "Get off the stage." Get up, calling him Uncle Tom, screaming so loud, Sammy couldn't get into the countdown. He with his conductor, George Rhodes, that he was trying to get him to count down for the music to drown out the booze, but George Rhodes had headphones on and couldn't even hear that. So all of a sudden, Sammy stood there, and they just kept jeering and booing and screaming, "Get off the stage!" And we were backstage, had knots in our stomach. The great Sammy Davis Jr. being booed by his own people, and the MC came out and said, calmed everybody down, and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, what is our fight all about? If it is about individual freedom." Isn't that what we're fighting about? A person could be a Protestant, a Catholic, a Jew, a Democrat, a Republican. Isn't that what we're fighting for? The man came 3,500 miles to sing for you. Doesn't he at least deserve to be heard? And mumble, grumble, everybody sat down. Sammy went over and changed his sheet music. And he sang one song, and he got a standing ovation. He sang, "I Gotta Be Me." And that night, those lyrics never meant as much as they did that night. He walked that stage, whether I'm right, whether I'm wrong, whether I find a place in this world or never belong, I gotta be me. I'll go it alone if that's how it must be. I can't be right for somebody else if I'm not right for me. And halfway through that song, we're going, you could feel he's getting that crowd back. And in the end of that song, a standing ovation. It was like, we still don't believe your politics, but that was special. In my 52 years in show business, I've seen a lot of people get a tough crowd and get them back in a half hour or 45 minutes or in an hour. I've never seen anybody take a hostile audience and in one song get a standing ovation. To this day, that's the most incredible performance I've ever seen on stage. Because of that, after I started making it as a single, I was doing Johnny Carson, Mike Douglas, Dinosaur, Midnight Special, Rock Concert, Soul Train, American Bandstand. I was doing all these shows, but I kept bugging my agent, Debbie Miller at William Morris. I want to do the Sammy and Company show. Sammy had the variety show out of Tahoe, and she couldn't get me on the show. She said, "Tom, you're doing all the other shows. Why do you want to do that show?" I said, "Because I saw him do something so special, and I just really wanted to meet him." She finally, Bill Cosby was supposed to be on the show, and he had to cancel at the last minute. So they called William Morris for another comedian, and Debbie said to the guy, Eric, who was producing the show, "Please, use Tom Dreesen." He said, "Oh, all right." And now I get on the plane in Burbank. She called me, get over to airport right away. I get on a plane in Burbank. I'm on my way when he calls and says, "Never mind, we got another comedian, Sandy Barron. Tell Tom he doesn't have to come." And she started crying on the phone. "He's on his way. Don't do that." But anyhow, I get there and I'm going to do this routine about growing up in Harvey and playing basketball on an all-black basketball team, playing football on all-black football. I'm going to do a routine about growing up around black folks. Which I did on a lot of the shows. And the producer said, "I saw you on the Tonight Show doing those routines. Don't do that on this show." And it's a true story. He said, I said, "Why? That's what I prepared to do." He said, "You don't understand, a white guy talking about black folks." I said, "I grew up there. I'm telling the truth about where I grew up." He said, "But you don't understand. I saw you on the Tonight Show. Johnny's white and Sammy's black." And I said, "No shit, But I did the routine and it scored real big. And Sammy told me that day, he said, "I'm going to take you on the road with me." And he took me on the road for like 3 years.
Wow, incredible. Yeah, and then of course you were with Sinatra on the road for 14 years, I think it was. And one of the things, in addition to seeing you open for Sinatra, I caught your one-man show that you tour the country with about an evening of stories and laughter and memories of Sinatra, which was just incredible. And tell us about how you came together working with Sinatra. Was it Mickey Rudin that was involved as attorney?
Yeah. I now call that same show "The Man Who Made Sinatra Laugh." It's the same kind of show, but it's a 90-minute show of stand-up comedy. But then, as you know, I segue to a bar and start telling stories, and then pictures come on the screen and video authenticating the stories I'm telling, about Frank and I and stuff. But what happened was I was working at Caesars with Smokey Robinson in Lake Tahoe.
Yeah.
And Frank was appearing at Harris, where I had appeared many times. And I was a fan of Frank's, obviously. I told you when I was shining shoes, he was on all the jukeboxes. So one night, I don't know why I chose that night. We were there for like a week, Smokey and I. And for some reason, on one night, I said, "I'll go this night." I came off stage. I didn't even change out of my stage clothing. And I ran over to Harris. As you know, it's one casino away. And so I was running into the showroom because I didn't want to miss Frank's opening. Frank Sinatra created more excitement walking to the microphone than most people created with their whole act. I mean, the room would erupt. Every time I saw him, it was just amazing to watch when he walked out.
Yeah.
how the crowd reacted. So I wanted to rush in there and I wanted to catch that. And out in front was Mickey Rudin was, well, I didn't know it was Mickey at the time. Holmes Hendrickson, the vice president of Harris Hotel, was out in front talking to this big heavyset guy with a cigar. And he saw me. Holmes Hendrickson said, Tommy, come here. And I reluctantly went over because I didn't want to miss the opening. And he said, Tommy, this is Mickey Rudin, the guy with the cigar. And I recognized the name. That was Frank Sinatra's lawyer and a very powerful guy in our industry.
Yes.
He said, Mickey, this is Tom Dreesen, and I think Tom would make a great opening act for Frank Sinatra. And the lawyer got a pained expression on his face like he heard that a million times. And he winked at the vice president, but I caught the wink. He said, hey, kid, if I gave you a week with Frank, would you want more than 50,000? I said, Mr. Rudin, put it this way. If you gave me a week with Frank, would you want more than 50,000? He said, oh, I said, I like this kid. And a week later, they gave me 1 week with Frank at the Golden Nugget in Atlantic City. And I thought, this is great. I'll get my picture taken with him and I'll hang it in every bar back in Harvey and back in Chicago. But the second night I was with him, he and his wife, Barbara, took me out to dinner. And I can remember like it was yesterday. He set his knife and his fork down and he looked across the table and he said to me, I like your material and I like your style. I'd like you to do a few other dates with me if you're interested. And I didn't say, let me check my calendar. I said, oh, yeah. And it turned into almost 14 years, 45, 50 cities a year. A friendship that I'll never forget. I miss him every day of my life. I was a pallbearer at his funeral, and I spoke at his funeral. And I again, during those years that I toured with Frank Sinatra, I turned down more sitcoms and more opportunities for a show than most comedians get offered in a lifetime. But I knew that it was an end of an era, and I knew that I was with this living legend. And I loved the guy. We became very good friends, and toward the end, in the beginning, he was the boss of this incredible tour.
Yeah.
And then in the middle, we became like buddies. He liked to hang out. We'd hang out till dawn. I'd stay at his house 5, 6 times a year. He would come and get me out of my bungalow and we'd go for a ride around the desert till the dawn because he never went to bed till the sun came up. He was nocturnal,
I think you said in your show that he would occasionally want to drive, and that was a scary experience because he had been chauffeured around for so many years. He didn't have the driving skills maybe he had as a younger man.
As a younger man, he didn't have driver skills. The story I tell is that while we were there, we went to his home.
Yeah.
Here it was. Now I'm down there, and here's all he had this huge compound and bungalows all around the outer perimeter that said New York. They were called New York, New York, Strangers in the Night, Tender Trap, My Way, named after his songs. And his house guests, I go, it's my first time down there, and here's his house guests having a big cocktail party the first night we arrived. And there's Gregory Peck and his wife, Veronique, and there's Kirk Douglas and his wife, Ann. There's Jack Lemmon and his wife, Felicia. There's Clint Eastwood and whoever he was dating at the time. There was Robert Wagner and Joe St. John, Angie Dickinson, all these stars that I had seen in the movies when I was a kid. And I'm in the corner there and saying, wow, this is really something. Well, the next day he had a brunch. And at this brunch, he also had the ambassador from Italy there with his wife. And Frank said at the brunch, everybody was standing around after they'd been eating. He said, I'm going to drive the ambassador and his wife to the airport. Who wants to go with me? And the room emptied. Boom. In a second, the room emptied, right? And I'm the only one standing. I said, Frank, I'll go with you. Come on, Tommy, let's go. And we go outside, and he had so many cars, but he had a station wagon that Lee Iacocca had given him. A Chrysler station wagon. He said, Tommy, you ride in the back with the ambassador's wife. And he said, and the ambassador will get up front with me. I get in the back seat, and there's this little old Italian lady. She nods at me, and I nod at her. Now, you're going to leave the compound, and there's a security gate there. And the security guard's job is to get out of the security gate, open up the gate, walk out onto the street, which is Frank Sinatra Drive there, look both ways, see that it's clear. When it is clear, wave you out. Well, he opened up the gate, took one step, and Frank went right by him. Boom, out onto the street. People were slamming on their brakes. Cars turning sideways. Her eyes got this big. I'm going, holy cow, what the hell? Now, he takes up. She's looking at me. She's, terrified, But I'd never ridden with him either. Now, every stop sign we got to, he would go halfway into the intersection, like into the middle of the intersection,
Oh
by the third stoplight, I realized why I was the only one in that room standing when he said. By the fourth stoplight, she had the rosary out. She was saying the rosary, We finally get to the airport, drove out onto the tarmac. She gets out of the car. We were out in front of the private jet where the ambassador and his wife are going to go back to Italy in a private jet. And she gets out of the car and she comes up to me and she said, "Do you have to ride a back with a him?" And I nodded my head, yes. And she took her thumb and made the sign of the cross on my forehead, you know. But on the way back, he's doing the same thing. He's driving, he's cutting people off. He's talking to me about the Count Basie band. And if Frank wanted to go from one lane to the other, he went. Not directionals, that's for other people. He just moved over, you know.
Right.
He went from the outside lane to the inside and put a guy up on that center divide. A guy slammed on his brakes and went up center divide, and Frank didn't even realize it. I said to myself, "Oh my God, he cut that guy off." Now Frank's still talking. Yeah, Tommy, Count Basie. This guy backs up. Now the guy's chasing us. He's chasing the car. He finally gets on the inside. I'm on the passenger side, and he's cursing at me. "You son of a bitch." And I look at the guy, and I shrug my shoulders. I go, "Hey," I pointed at Frank. "I ain't driving. He's driving." The guy's going, "You son of a..." And he looks, and he sees Frank Sinatra. He's mouthing to me, "Frank Sinatra? Frank Sinatra?" And I nodded my head, yes. He went, "Ah." Yeah, go ahead. I think he thought he can hardly wait to get home and say, "Honey, you ain't gonna believe who damn near killed me, Frank Sinatra."
Yeah, if you're going to get run off the road, that's who you want it to be.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dreesen. It was such a pleasure to talk to somebody who actually performed in the Dean Martin roast. That's something I didn't think we'd ever pull off, and to talk to somebody who not only did one but did two and killed on both occasions, it's a real pleasure to speak to you. And
well, thank you. But you know what? Why you're talking to me is I'm probably the only one left alive that did this Dean Martin roast. I think there's Ruth Buzzy, and she's not in real good health. I pray for her every night. She's an old friend. And I think, I'm not sure who else is. Do you know who else?
There's a few other people, but like Jimmy Walker did one that you were on.
Oh, that's right, Jimmy. Yeah.
Billy Crystal, I think, did a Muhammad Ali roast because he did a great Muhammad Ali impression. I think that's why he was on that one. But you're certainly one of the last few. There's not that many still standing.
I know oftentimes and I'll end with this. Oftentimes I go to the Laugh Factory or the Comedy Store to try out new material or the improv, and some new comedian will get up and say, "Blah, blah, blah." And here's a legend. Here's a legend, Tom Dreesen. And I get up and I say, "You know how you become a legend? All your critics are dead."
That's right.
That's how you become a legend. Everybody, all those who hated me died. I outlived them all.
That's it. You just have to outlive everybody.
Well, thank you.
We're glad you did, and I'm glad you chatted with us. I'm really appreciative.
I enjoyed it. Let's do it again anytime you want.
All right. Take care, Mr. Dreesen. Thank you so much.
Okay, buddy. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.